So thanks for sitting with me, Assaf. I've been really looking forward to this conversation. I have a really strong gut feeling that there'll be a lot of people watching this MOOC that are going to relate to you for a variety of reasons. You're youthful, and at the same time, they're going to appreciate sort of, I think, your story of how you got to where you are today so quickly. You know, you're the co-founder of an organization that's providing advisory services for impact investing. Like, how did that happen? So could you tell me a little bit about your background?
Yeah, sure. So I think probably the first thing that comes to mind is that these things never happen in really expected ways. Like, it's not like I had a plan and went forward. In fact, many elements of how I live my life today and what I do for work are probably the opposite of what I would have thought. I started my work around human rights, and specifically through charity and nonprofit realms. So I was actually fairly anti-business. So one of the first things I did was in 2006, I was focused on Darfur as a human rights issue. And if you followed that campaign, it's one that checked off all the boxes of what a human rights advocacy campaign needs to do. It got celebrities like George Clooney on board. There was a movie around Hotel Rwanda developed sort of to highlight that issue. You had the President of the United States talking about how this was sort of an unconscionable situation. And yet, all the boxes were checked off and nothing actually happened. And that's because the mechanics of the UN Security Council sort of ground it to a halt. And so that was an extremely frustrating thing to participate in as someone who was involved in it. And I know that people who are even more involved than myself, I think were sort of really found it really tough to maintain the morale through that effort. At the same time, around the same time in 2007, Steve Jobs and Apple launched the iPhone, and with it the App Store. And within a few months and within a couple of years, you had hundreds of thousands of apps, each of which took, half a human year to develop. So you add up the amount of effort that was unleashed in such a short span of time.
I've never thought of it that way.
That drastically changed the world.
Yeah.
And I lived inside of these two experiences, and they didn't directly connect, but I saw sort of a comparison between them, where one was by the book everything that you had to do to theoretically move the needle forward, and nothing moved forward. And the other was this was sort of clearly in the business world, and by virtue of sort of instilling everyone with imagination and giving them the tools to do something, completely opened up a whole new set of markets and a whole new set of possibilities for humanity. I mean, and you see that a few years later on. So that was the first clue that I had that, perhaps there's something inside of this business domain or this business thing that could really influence the world, and how do you actually repurpose that and use it towards social good? And so I got interested in social entrepreneurship after I read a book by Muhammad Yunus, and he described social business and what it could be. And I said, I can't believe that someone has put a label and a concept around all of these disparate ideas that I had circling in my head. And my first thought was, we have to tell people about this. So we co-founded a group called Young Social Entrepreneurs of Canada, which was, as the name stated, essentially a social network for social entrepreneurs across the country. And we tried to make social entrepreneurship a dinner table conversation when people were still tripping over themselves to say the word social entrepreneurship. And we thought it would be a really uphill battle, because we're using strange terminology, we're trying to inject new ways of thinking. And in fact, what we found is it was sort of an idea whose time had come. And so we were really, the wind was a tailwind, not a headwind. And we were able to engage with thousands of young people across the country, some just exploring ideas and some with actually fairly developed ventures. But all of them complained about the same thing, which was that they couldn't find access to the capital that they needed to actually grow. And that was the first time that I'd heard of this or experienced that issue. At the same time, we had investors coming to us and saying, we want to support ventures like these, we want to support these things. How do we do that? And we didn't have a great answer for how to do that. So we made a couple of introductions here and there, but we didn't, it wasn't a systemic process. And that's where my interest became more about solving that problem. And so I partnered up with two people who I really respect and co-founded what is now Purpose Capital, the goal of which is to light a fire under impact investment as a field and to really make sure that it realizes the potential that it has.
Right, so you're brokering those conversations to allow the field to really kind of emerge and grow and take off.
Yeah, and we didn't know how that would happen or how to make money off of it or who would pay us to do that. I think we did a lot of wayfinding, and there weren't many set precedents around how to do that. Everything from what to provide to people, what was valuable, to how much to charge for it. So there was a lot that we had to discover, most of it by accident and most of it through some kind of friction or through making a lot of other mistakes.
Right. So you're describing the process of learning. I'm going to loop back to that. So can you hold your thought on that one?
Great.
Great.
It all ties in.
I want to just ask again one final question on a personal level, sort of. What compels you to this space? Like, why do you get up in the morning on a rough day? Why do you say tomorrow will be better?
It's a great question. I think, when I was younger, I would see that the road ahead was one that was much more difficult, especially ecologically and in terms of equitability around the world. And I thought, that's interesting. It might be my generation that has to clean up a lot of this mess. So maybe I'll just get a head start on it now. And I really think that the seed of that thought has sort of stayed with me and is what motivates me. I think we probably have 15 to 20 years to make a real intervention in the trajectory that we're going on, whether it's in energy or education or healthcare or whatever it is. And so that's sort of a discrete time window, like a keyhole in history, to be able to make a difference. And so I feel that I'm in some kind of race, and the people who join up to this are in some kind of race as well.
Got goosebumps.
To make as much of a difference as possible in, a little over a decade or 2 decades.
Yeah, wow, that's powerful. So you started Purpose Capital, you said with two people that you really respected. So I want to know just something, not about Purpose Capital per se. This is not an interview about your organization specifically, but I want to understand sort of the values that your organization has as an example for how other organizations can do business differently.
Well, the first thing is accepting that we may have to be the first ones to find the answer. So that there's always someone to learn from, there's always other fields to learn from, but particularly in our field, we just had to get comfortable with the idea that no one really knew. Our best advisors contributed a lot of thought, but also acknowledged that I don't really know, there isn't a templated answer for this. You got to go out and find it. And so I think there has to be a little bit of courage to be able to do that. And as part of that, I think there has to be courage to be able to think differently, which is really counterintuitive because there are certain ways of thinking or doing that have been sort of de-risked by virtue of everyone else doing them. And so to do something different, especially when you're new to the field, seems really strange and it seems like the wrong thing to do. But if you're going to build an organization that does things that ushers in a new way of doing, by definition you need to do things differently than the way that they were done before. So I think those two are really important for us. And lastly, I think, we really do believe in scale, and I think that there are a few ways to achieve it, but we believe that problems are global and solutions have to be global as well, and they can be locally contextualized. But as I say, if you put this in the context of a race, we got to get to scale quickly. And so that really drives some of our thinking.
So I am sensing that some of the earlier comments you just made on this question was the entrepreneurial spirit, right? So you've been a serial entrepreneur and you're working with social entrepreneurs. I wonder if you could comment on whether you see any difference, and if so, what that difference would be between the traditional entrepreneur, launches a business, wants to make money, maybe solve a problem. Maybe the problem solving is the driver and the money comes later, but traditional business versus a social entrepreneur. So if you could.
There's probably two ways that people come to it that I can think of. I think someone who is sort of a one-time entrepreneur, that can be a really powerful sort of endeavor, in the sense that if there's a problem that just keeps bugging them and keeps coming up, and all of a sudden they come up with a solution for it and passionately want to bring that to the world, I think that, you know, that could be sort of their life's purpose, to do that. I'm a serial entrepreneur because it's a form of expression. I don't know how to do anything else. I wouldn't be successful at doing anything else, and I got that sense really early on. My first job was at an unnamed bookstore. And later I worked a little bit in retail, and in both of those I remember being crushed by the idea that this is what the rest of my life looks like, is going into work and fake smiling and doing menial things, and it seems so purposeless. And I didn't have a greater sense of purpose. I was too young to really get that part, but it just seemed like such a waste of time. And the money I would make from it is okay, but I don't know, that wasn't really a motivating factor. And I remember feeling like there was something wrong with me, because there was a lot of pressure. I come from a family of immigrants, and the pressure to achieve and to get the few things right. If you came without a lot of money, one of the first things that you want to fix and you want your kids to fix is money as a sort of a personal security issue. So I sensed that I was feeling the wrong way about it, or being spoiled, or whatever else it was. But ultimately, I just knew that, you know, either that or other institutions. I sort of struggled in university as well, because of a similar feeling of doing something because it's some template, as opposed to doing something that was a form of self-expression.
So on a personal level, and also within your work, you've said some things that make me think about learning, the importance of learning, and everything that encompasses, right? I wonder if any stories of learning strike you, that a big shift you made, you thought one thing, you course corrected, and just the importance of learning within this space, this activity.
I think it's, so one of the things that I talk quite a bit about when I talk to other people who are starting as entrepreneurs is learning to accept what you can't control and focus on what you can. And most of the things that you encounter are things that you can't really control. They're external factors, they're things that happen to you, happen to your team, you have to deal with them. The one thing that you can control is what you take out of the situation and what you apply for next time. So learning is in some cases all you have to be able to build better for next time. I've learned a ton, and a lot of it that has, you know, it rarely feels like learning. It rarely feels like an achievement. Often it feels like struggling. And only once you sort of get through that, or try to get through that and fail, do you come away saying, oh, okay, that's how things work. That's what I would do next time. So I think just the one caution that I would have is that you call it learning afterwards, but in the moment, it's just all hard.
Pain.
Yeah, it's pain, absolutely. But I've also come to accept that. One of the things that I learned fairly quickly on was I treated everything like an emergency, and you'll wear yourself out doing that. And so one of the first things I was able to gauge better was what's an emergency, what isn't, what needs my direct attention, what doesn't, what's the difference between urgent and important, and you know, how to manage your own reaction to that. Otherwise, you'll burn yourself out quickly. Yeah.
Okay, so I want to talk about the field of social entrepreneurship a bit. So there'll be people watching this MOOC that, you know, we say that we want to attract people who are already working on a social initiative, deep in, and we want to speak to people who are looking to start something. And then we're also interested in the people who are sort of just get curious, right? Why do you suppose social entrepreneurship and sort of the social sector has got a lot of momentum on its side right now? Just out of curiosity. And where do you think it's going? And what do you think it's going to accomplish in the long run?
So I'll say probably two things about it. One is we can probably in sort of an economic sense, we can afford to be social entrepreneurs in the sense that the advances made by previous generations allow us to aspire to more than just day in, day out work. I mean, and that's happened in concert with the economy allowing for more customized work, more artisanship. So I think the era of mass industrialization would have made it really difficult to think like this. And so one is we have an enabling environment, or an environment that at least gives you room to think differently. The second thing is, I think it's just everyone knows in their heart and in their minds what the major problems we have are. I don't think social entrepreneurship is, I don't think you have to be, especially, I don't know. I think it's really pragmatic. It's like, we have major problems. We've got to solve them. As it happens, doing that actually makes us feel really fulfilled. But I think part of the sort of paradigm or the zeitgeist that it's tapping into is everyone is looking at the road ahead and saying, we got to do something now. And everyone has a different answer to that, and it manifests in different sectors and different causes that people take on. But I really do believe it's a pragmatic response to, as sort of a planetary society, to where we're headed and how we manage ourselves going forward.
Yeah, so just the need. The environment that allows for it, and then just the pure old need. And it actually makes us feel better, like you said, working on these problems, right? And
I think there is a little bit of sort of, there's a sense of enlightenment in the sense that the prior version of economy that we had only valued one set of things, only valued one factor of life. And so now we're saying, well, we tried that, and for some reason it's not capturing all the value that there is in life. How can we work and think differently about how to get value from all other aspects? And it's one of the reasons why people from all sorts of well-paying jobs are still not satisfied by that. I mean, I don't necessarily need to go through all the examples of where financial profit doesn't capture all the value. But I do think it's also coming to terms with the idea that the experiences we have in life are sort of unified and integrated. So we don't have an economic realm where we act as rational beings and money is the only driver, and then a social realm where that's completely disconnected from the economy. We live one integrated experience. And so we need to have an economy that speaks to that one integrated experience as well.
So my last question, thanks so much for sitting down and having this conversation with me, Assaf. You have conversations with people who are looking to invest, and you have conversations with people who are looking for funds. What advice would you give to both sides of that equation?
So I think that there are a couple of things that both could probably do that would increase the level of success. So one is, for investors, I think it would be helpful to clarify exactly what you're doing it for. Where is the balance between needing this as sort of a, hold on, one second.
I didn't give you this question in advance, sorry.
That's okay. I'm trying to, it's an important one, and so I want to get it right.
Yeah. Like, what advice do you give to social entrepreneurs? It could be in terms of pitch. It could be like skills, like basic stuff too. Like where to go. What advice you'd give them in terms of what to learn and stuff like that. Okay.
Got it.
All right. So more of this. Okay. Yeah.
Great. So I think there are probably two pieces of advice that I'd give to entrepreneurs. I would say, your task, especially when you're trying to meet with investors, you have to know what it feels like to sit on the other side of the table as much as possible, even if you've never had that experience. Read up on it, talk to people who have, and think about what would make it easy for you, what would check off all the boxes to make a yes virtually impossible to ignore. And so how can you, when meeting someone else, assuming that they are the right partner for you as an investor, how can you make it as easy as possible for them to say yes? for investors, what I would say is, first of all, if they're already in the impact space, I would really encourage that. I think that's excellent. What I would say is, one of the few pieces of influence that you have in such a big world is the way that you spend your capital. And so your capital is a form of your values expression. And so what we're starting to do is to realize that, and it's starting to show up in, I'll take 1% or 5% or 10% of my assets and use them in this way. What I would challenge people to do is say, let's take 100%, because even if there's a large portion that you don't use, that has consequence. So it might not have positive impact, it might have some other form of impact, but regardless. I think Aldous Huxley said, facts do not cease to exist because they are ignored. And so just because we don't apply a social or environmental lens to the capital that we don't purpose that way doesn't mean that it has consequences.
Yeah.
So if you really believe something, if you believe it enough to write a check charitably, if you believe it enough to teach it your kids and want that for their world, then believe that with 100% of what you have to give.
Thanks, Assaf. It's
Thank
always
you.
a pleasure to see you.
Yeah, likewise.
Karim, it's really great of you to spend some time chatting with me. I was talking to Assaf earlier, and I'm going to say the same thing at the front end of this. I think there's going to be a lot of people who will see themselves in you, as a relatively young person who's doing something, but also aspiring, to see how far you can go so quickly to make change in a particular space, right? So if you would indulge a little personal narrative on how you got to today.
Right. Yeah, so thank you for the opportunity, and it's great to be here, and I think telling my story, and I do hope it inspires other people. About 10 years ago is where this all started. When I was doing my undergrad, really didn't understand what I wanted to do after that, but knew that there were some things that I thought the world needed. I grew up in Kenya, and growing up in Kenya, you see all sorts of issues like poverty, lack of education, lack of healthcare all around you. And on the other hand, I studied business and economics, and they don't teach you in business school that you can reconcile the two things, that social development and business can actually come together. And so 10 years ago, doing a placement in microfinance was really what brought it home, where I had the opportunity to sit down with clients of the bank I worked with to really ask them how a $100 loan makes a difference in their lives, in their kids' lives, in their community. And the responses were pretty amazing. And so that really inspired me to try and think more closely about this concept of how capital can really create opportunity, but also enable social progress and development. And so 10 years ago, after coming back from an overseas placement, trying to think about what this means for Canada, because this is where I live now, to try and understand these concepts around community development, social finance, social enterprise. And so it's been a 10-year journey of trying to figure that out. Initially working more as a consultant in community development and with social enterprises and nonprofits. And then to work with a really interesting group called Social Capital Partners, which is a pioneer in the space in the area of social finance and venture philanthropy. And then more recently starting Purpose Capital with Assaf and Norm, my co-founders. And the motivation for founding Purpose Capital was really that we saw this link between the potential of capital and what it could do, but also the opportunities to deploy that capital in ways that actually created impact. There's the theoretical capital can do good, but the reality of doing it is actually quite hard. And you need intermediaries, groups like us, to be able to connect capital and opportunity in the right ways, whether it's helping investors to be able to make the right kinds of decisions around what kind of capital and when to deploy it, or to help entrepreneurs figure out, do they actually need capital or something else? And more recently, the work that we do around creating new products and platforms to be able to connect the two.
What is impact investing?
Really great question. So not everybody agrees, but I'll try and give you my definition. So impact investing is an approach to investing that intentionally embeds the application of social or environmental impact within how you allocate capital. So for each of us today, we know about risk and return. When you walk into a bank again, they ask you about your time horizon, your risk profile, the kinds of returns you want to make, what kinds of asset classes you want to invest in. Nobody asks you what you care about. And really, impact investing is taking a very deliberate approach to saying, if there are things that you care about in the world, let's embed those into your decision-making framework around how you allocate your capital without having to sacrifice the things that matter around risk or return. That's one of the common myths that we see in this space, that people think, well, if you're going to do good with your money, you have to give up some type of return. That's not necessarily true. And like any other investment decision, you could lose money, you could make money. The challenge is to be much more informed about where your money is going, what it's actually doing, and that you can actually make decisions that are consistent with your values and the things you actually care about.
Do you think we've reached a stage where there are enough opportunities for people to invest in, to make decisions based on the issues that they care about?
Not at the moment. I mean, the average person, again, when they walk into a bank, likely won't be able to get the kinds of products that they're looking for. But if you walked into a credit union, for example, you're maybe much more likely to be able to find something that aligns with your values because of the mission-based nature of how credit unions are constructed. But I think increasingly there's a generational shift where I think if, for example, the students in your class, each one of them went to their bank and said, I actually want to invest in a way that's aligned with my values, the people that are developing those products will know that there are people who will buy these products if they get developed. Today, the banks actually don't think that all of us care enough. But if all of us all of a sudden started to say, well, on the know your client process, when you sit down in your first meeting with an advisor, if all of us insisted that we cared about a social issue or environmental issue and insisted we embed that into our portfolio, the world would look very different and you'd have a lot more product to invest in.
Right.
So those are some of the challenges I think we're trying to move forward even as a company to say, how do we get the average person aware that they do have a voice and options in the space? How do we get the people that are developing product to understand that not only is there a generational shift, but also everybody, frankly, would love to do this if they were given the opportunity, and that there's a value proposition to banks, to credit unions, to other financial institutions to actually doing this, because hopefully that's where the world is going. We see this around climate change. We believe that the same principles exist around social impact more generally. And so really the theory of change around Purpose Capital as a company is to be able to create the next decade, or create the conditions for the next decade of both capital as well as opportunity, and what are the best ways to connect the two.
So what do you love about this work? Like, what do you find so compelling about this space?
Well, I mean, I think, apart from the every day is a very different day and experience, we're actually getting to build, this field called impact investing as a company. We get to do really interesting research to understand what is happening in the space. We get to advise and work alongside some of the leading foundations and individuals that are actually deploying capital. We get to work with entrepreneurs and companies and networks to help them use capital in the ways that they can to generate impact. But also we want to try and create the next generation of products and platforms. Today none of us really can walk into a bank and invest for impact, like actually make our money do the kinds of things we want it to do. We give at the end of the year, we get a tax receipt. Many of us want more than that. We shop differently now, we eat differently. Why aren't we investing differently? And so the next generation of investment products, for example, can each one of us become an impact investor. Not only foundations or not only individuals that have, millions of dollars. That is something, for example, that drives us a lot. So I think the opportunity to really construct, influence, and build a field at the same time as making sure that it's moving forward in all the right ways is very appealing.
So if I Google Impact Investing Canada, there are some reports that have been written with your name attached to them as an author or co-author at very least. So, I see some of the numbers where there's a certain amount of money that's in the social finance space, and the trajectories are really quite hockey stick, right? And there are a lot of critics that say, it all sounds really great. And are skeptical about it. What do you think the long-term trajectory of this social finance stuff is?
Well, everything I see is positive and follow these trends. I have to believe that it's true, and I do. And everything that I've seen and the kinds of things we work on within our day-to-day work at Purpose Capital all have reinforced the fact that this is growing. I don't think it's a fad by any means. I think that there are lots of reasons why this makes sense in terms of the business case for the organizations behind it. And you have to look at the different components. The first is that in 2007 and 2008, a lot of people were actually very scarred by what they thought they believed the world looked like and what the world actually looked like. You know, they thought they knew what they were buying in terms of products. The reality turned out to be quite different. Microfinance was virtually the only asset class that made money in 2007 and 2008. Every other asset class lost money. You've got a new generation of wealth that is keen to embed their values in how they think about how they live, shop, work, etc., as well as invest. You've also got an increasing recognition of climate change and the long-term implications of investing and how we do what we do just as human beings on this planet. And people are increasingly aware that social considerations matter in every part of your decision making. So for me, there's a lot of convergence of trends that point to the fact that we're moving to a much better place as a society. The challenge is, can we bring it all together in terms of, let's say, a product or a platform or an opportunity that people can actually access? Because if the opportunities around social finance, you know, are only available to the converted, you know, to those of us that actually are actively seeking this, you know, we'll not have mainstreamed this the way that we want to. So I think the opportunity then is to try and make it accessible to everybody. And this concept of making everyone an impact investor, I think, is quite appealing because everybody gives, whether it's their time, their money, etc. Whereas why can't everybody invest in the same way? If we can make investing for impact as easy as giving for impact, I think the world would look much better.
So as a last question then, you have conversations with investors and you have conversations with people seeking funds who are doing great work. What advice would you give to both? I mean, not the same advice, but to both sides of the equation.
Yeah, well, I think one area where both sides actually could benefit from advice is really just to be clear about what you know and believe and be very articulate about it, but also be able to find ways to communicate it to different audiences. So investors use their dollars in a certain way to express their preferences. Well, you know, they can also be very visible about the kind of impact they really want to see in the world, as much as the kind of return they want to see. I think for the individual entrepreneur that is seeking finance, entrepreneurs by their nature are driven to address a specific market problem through a set of solutions. There are many more entrepreneurs that are now considering social and environmental factors within their business models and how they operate. I think to be able to link the social benefit to the type of capital you bring in is really important, but it's also something they don't teach you in business school, right? Sometimes the types of issues you're trying to address, let's say affordable housing, traditionally the government has had a role in that. Well, all of a sudden, if you're talking about private capital having a role, I would argue that government and philanthropy still has a role in that issue, but maybe a different role than what social finance could bring to a table. So I think it's imperative for both investors as well as entrepreneurs to understand the role of philanthropy and grants, the role of private capital, and the role of other hybrid forms of capital like foundations who have a bit more flexibility around what they could provide. And together, you know, is where you can achieve the kind of scale. Because if it's simply philanthropy or private markets, you have limitations around what you can achieve and how you get to the most promising opportunities and solutions. I think the blending is the hard part. And part of the challenge on both sides, whether it's entrepreneurs or investors, is trying to use language that the other side understands. Because you see this across the public, private, and nonprofit sectors, where everybody uses different terms, or even if they're using similar terms, they're using them in their own construct.
Right.
So I think one of the pieces of advice I'd give to each of the groups is to try and understand the language of the other side of the table, to be able to appreciate the different forms of capital, and I think overall to really be clear about the type of impact we want to achieve and work from that. Because the moment impact investing, in my opinion, becomes just about the money, then I think we should just be doing investing. Right? If it truly is impact investing, let's make sure impact is front and center in every conversation, and we're as disciplined and diligent about impact as we are around financial returns. And I think the field has some way to go around that. You know, we're looking at standards and different types of tools to measure impact. But if I were to, again, provide advice to the next generation of people that are looking to engage in social finance, it would be to help us elevate the bar around impact. Because we've got a lot of sophistication around investing from 200 to 300 years of doing it. We don't have the equal sophistication on the impact side. So I think it's a compelling opportunity for people in your class, people that are watching this, and really just the next generation of impact investing, the next decade of impact investing.
Great. Thanks so much for your time, Karim. It's been great. Really,
thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.